The Bahamas, a dream holiday destination with 700 islands and countless coral reefs, surrounded by a sea warmed by the Gulf Stream. But also endless white and pink-colored coral sandy beaches, surrounded by a lush underwater world, which even attracts deep-sea fishermen from nearby Florida. But this is a paradise of contrasts. 340 days of sunshine on the one hand, yet increasingly frequent, increasingly violent storms on the other. The overflowing fauna of the tropical sea, so rich in species, constitutes a counterpoint to the rather barren soil of the islands, which were never really able to provide food for their inhabitants. Until a few years ago, tourism made the Bahamas into one of the most prosperous islands in the Caribbean. But the real estate crisis in the USA curbed the influx of tourists. This has led to the closure of several hotels, and the once crowded marinas now appear deserted. The gap between rich and poor Bahamians widens on a daily basis. Diving centers like UNEXO are important employers for the locals. Here, everything humanly possible is done for sustainable tourism, including environmental activities such as refuse collection above and below the water. Every employee is proud to belong to this amiable team in which environmental awareness is promoted in a big way. Bahama, or shallow sea. In time, this of course became the Bahamas. We have come to see the other side of the Bahamas, behind the crumbling facade. Here we find majestic shipwrecks, which, even without a glorious past, perform an important task for the animals. We want to explore the mysterious caves, about which the locals claim that something terrible there will come from the depths and carry them away. We decide to begin here, in the undulating forests of soft coral. Fans, fronds, rods and whips, the most diverse of gorgonians, sway to the beat of the waves, driven only by the Gulf Stream. Indeed, stone corals, sponges and reef fish colorfully accentuate this reception. But the little one over there doesn't seem to be ready for visitors. All the time, he keeps trying to make his opinion clear. Get back, go away, this is all mine. The really big barracudas are loners. In some areas, they are more feared than sharks. This comes as no surprise when considering their streamlined, agile bodies and their exceedingly sharp teeth, as if purely conceived for hunting purposes, and extremely aggressive. In fact, some of the attacks assigned to sharks are actually the work of a barracuda. The boss has brought his rather large family with him, a complete shoal of young fish, although they aren't as small as they once were, but always hungry. A pack like this is able to kidnap an entire shoal of fish by permanently circling them and then eating them one by one. It's quite astonishing that these yellow-tailed snappers have joined this dangerous horde. It takes a strategy, a good shelter, or an awful lot of luck to escape from such predators. Reefs, like this one here in the Bahamas, abundant in species and with dense vegetation, provide any number of hiding places. The corals and gorgonians also protect their inhabitants from the danger the sea holds in store. Almost every day of the year is associated with sunshine and gentle breezes, that cause the water to ripple? Well, almost every day. During the hurricane season, things can look a lot different, especially when the storm lashes the shallow water, creating havoc at more than 100 kilometers per hour. This black horn coral is extremely flexible, yet cannot withstand these elemental forces and can lose its hold. Fish then retreat to deeper regions, hide in caves formed by corals, seek shelter beneath overhangs, or simply bury themselves in the sand. Tube sponges, one of nature's stranger projects. Although they are animals, they have no feet or fins. They are condemned to spend their entire lives on one spot and stoically endure all of nature's forces. There he is again, the striped sergeant major we spotted earlier on. This little lunatic is seemingly always agitated, bravely ignoring the fact that many of those he attacks are often physically superior to him. His bluish hue indicates that he's a male, currently guarding eggs, hence his pugnacity. A blue-striped grunt. What an accomplishment of evolution. It seems to be a similar principle to that of zebras. Bright stripes, excellent as camouflage in sun-drenched water. At night, they appear colorless, and the dark ones ensure that each individual in the group remains unnoticed. A quick glance upwards reveals bright bellies are practical. The fish are difficult to find for predators behind the gleaming water surface. This French angelfish obviously pays great attention to his image. His tasteful slate-grey suit is skillfully enhanced by stylish yellow. Conscious of his handsomeness, the loner patrols his territory, whilst pretentiously rolling his eyes. His territory can consist of as much as a square kilometre, yet only his partner is allowed to join him. Once the little ones lose their cute striped cloak of youth, they are unwanted. He would probably be disgusted to discover that in many cookbooks, recipes abound for his preparation. These are typical reef shapes, in rows, similar to a castle's battlements, always perpendicular to the coastline. Small stone islands like these constitute a marine cradle. Coral polyps settle on them, multiply, and then grow toward the sun. These protective overhangs are often used as cozy resting places. This group of blue-striped grunts will wait until nightfall before going in search of prey. boxfish. What an appearance! His body resembles a starry night sky. He is equipped with a shell made of bone plate, which protects him, but at the same time prevents him from moving freely. He doesn't have to, though. When danger looms or in stress situations, he secretes a neurotoxin. Most predators are aware of this, meaning that he rarely has to make a quick getaway, although, if he had to, he could. There are sandy surfaces between almost every individual standing coral block. It's difficult for coral polyps to attach themselves and grow here. The sand is too loose and everything here remains in motion due to the swell. A constant to and fro, even the boxfish is forced back toward the camera. A garish yellow sponge. These come in all shapes and sizes. The divers of antiquity also used to gather them from the seabed to make bath sponges out of them. In the otherwise barren world of the oceans, coral reefs are like oases. Many of the inhabitants have developed unbelievable colors and shapes in order to improve their chances of survival. But even the corals themselves, which gave rise to the reefs, have produced quite a number of shape changes during the course of the last 500 million years. A perfectly tuned ecosystem with a decisive impact on life above the surface. The islands would be mercilessly exposed to the destructive power of the waves without this offshore protection. The reefs act as natural breakwaters, thereby reducing coastal erosion. These freestanding coral heads here sometimes look like mushrooms, a narrow body with a bushy hat made of hard corals and gorgonians. The Bahamas are known the world over as shark territory. Fortunately, commercial shark hunting was stopped relatively early when the shark's potential as a tourist attraction became apparent. Apart from these grey reef sharks, many other species can be found here. Lemon sharks, hammerheads, dreaded tiger sharks, and even great whites, often accompanied by mackerel, like these here. Possibilities for corals to establish themselves and spread out are few and far between, which is why such artificial anchorages are chosen. Polyps are indifferent. They begin with their work and take over inch by inch. The more light there is, the faster they grow and spread out. These coral polyps live in symbiosis with minute algae in their calcareous skeletons. They live via photosynthesis and couldn't exist without sunlight. And here, across the Bahama banks, there is enough light. The sea is never deeper than 25 meters, the best conditions. At the edges of the banks, the sea floor sinks to depths of up to 5,000 meters. These lofty structures of Mother Nature catch the eye from far away. Barrel sponges. Like mammoth trees, or when compared with human constructions, cathedrals. They grow very slowly and can be intriguingly old. The size of this one here signifies an age of around 100 to 200 years. The older examples were already in existence when slaves worked here at the island plantations or were relocated to America. A parrotfish lives on algae. He nibbles them off the coral until only fine sand remains. He is about as dainty as a wrecking ball, but he also creates space and light for new growths. The Atlantic blue tang surgeonfish searches for food in the same places as the parrotfish. He got his name from two scalpel-like and razor-sharp converted scales. These are yellow and located on his tail root. A charming, delicate creature, a young threadfish or diamond trevally. He looks a little lost, so alone in the huge blue ocean. This colorful life exudes lightness. The blue-faced angelfish here seems to take a leisurely stroll, even though there is almost always something ominous lurking in the background. Barely conceivable that devastating storms tear through this blaze of color. In the hurricane season, corals are broken off, torn from the ground. The majority of the existing corals are actually threatened. We heard of a project on the nearby Florida Keys. There, a solitary, passionate diver has been fighting against the acute reef destruction for years with an ingenious coral breeding method. His name is Ken Neddymeyer, and we decided to pay him a visit for him to explain his procedure to us. Here, in this nondescript warehouse by the sea, is the Coral Restoration Foundation, run by Ken. He breeds and branches collected fragments of coral in the reef. He then transports these to affected areas. His process has since been copied all over the world. He was recently honored as a CNN hero by the American News Channel. This title is only awarded to people who have campaigned in a unique way for the protection of life on our planet.
We would put a little piece of coral on the cap, and it starts to grow down over the cap and also starts to grow up and branch out. Now this coral is ready to go out on the reef. If we don't take it out on the reef, then we would come and we'd cut, cut right there, might cut there, might take 2 cuttings out of this, might do maybe one like that and one like that. So, just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 cuttings we could take from that. And then this part that's left would then bush back out, and in 6 months it would be ready to go out on the reef. 6 months, most of these would be ready to go too. So we get out there, we take the cap off, we epoxy this onto the bottom, and it grows.
After a severe hurricane, a previously healthy reef needs around 30 years in which to regenerate itself entirely. Unfortunately, most of the reefs in our seas are no longer healthy due to pollution and climate change. And hurricanes are on the increase. With this kind of restoration, a reef can be rebuilt in 10 years. Fast-growing species are bred for this. Several corals of the same species have to be used in order for them to reproduce. In the beginning, young corals were attached to small discs on the seabed. Then came the idea to fasten them to tree-like mounts anchored in the ground. This resulted in a 3 to 5 times faster growth rate. No special equipment is necessary, just donations and volunteers.
It's a long process to get to where my goal is to clone myself. How can I train 5 other people to do what I'm doing and spread them out and get them doing it? A local person on in our case, like say Bonaire or Colombia, and they take ownership in it. It's their project.
This beautiful lionfish may not look like it, but he is indeed a problem fish. He doesn't belong here. He is at home in the Indo-Pacific and the Red Sea. He just turned up off the coast of Florida in the 1990s, probably released by aquarists, and obviously feels at home here. In this colorful scene, only the slender antennae of the Caribbean spiny lobster disclose his position. He virtually cleans up the reef, chasing after slowly creeping or clinging invertebrates. He can't say no to dying or dead animals either. This large black grouper is a prized catch amongst anglers. Perhaps he could solve the immigrant lionfish problem his way. It would probably be a pleasure for a mature 1.5-meter long grouper, but the anglers are in no mind to grant the capital lad such a treat. The offshore reefs are as diverse underwater as the 700 islands of the Bahamas are above water. Gorgonians distract the attention from the actual reef architects, the hard corals. The undulations are less hectic here. The goatfish seem to be enjoying themselves anyway. gentle serenity in warm, sun-drenched and shallow water. But we want to dive deeper. There, where red, orange and yellow turn to blue, a dark, seemingly infinite blue. How deep is it here? 20 meters perhaps? And already there seems to be no more color. There, the outline of a sunken ship. The Bahamas can look back on a long seafaring tradition. Even before Christopher Columbus arrived in 1492, there were seafaring immigrants here from the Lesser Antilles. The Lucayan Indians. They fled to the Bahamas to escape from other Caribbean sailors. However, they didn't survive their encounter with the Portuguese discoverer for long. Imported diseases and their eventual enslavement wiped them out completely within just a few years, back in the 16th century. Later, pirates settled here, thousands in fact in their heyday. With their vessels, they made the sea routes unsafe. The smuggling continues to the present day here, with the help of ships. It was all about alcohol during the US Prohibition. Today, it's all about drugs. This huge ship has nothing to do with Jack Sparrow or even real pirates. It's a freighter, intentionally sunk off Grand Bahama as an artificial reef. A small ecosystem and a veritable playground for scuba divers. There, another lionfish immigrant. They're becoming even more numerous as they have no natural predators. Even sharks shy away from the poisonous rays emanating from the fins of a lionfish. The same goes for divers. Even rewards or a bounty for catching them seems to have little effect. Yes, they are hunted and caught in large numbers. They are cooked, steamed, and barbecued, but their invasion continues. A bristleworm. Amazing. It moves like an alien. With so many legs, it's no wonder that it can get around so well. Yes, he's a predator, and one that gobbles up any invertebrates that get in the way of his toxic bristles. Just what is the importance of color down here in the blue depths? Our lamps reveal that the corals, the sponges, and even fish settled here are just as colorful as those in shallow waters, where the sunlight shines on everything. Like these tiny royal grammars, adorned in regal purple. Tube sponges, lined up like organ pipes. Corals not only provide protection and food. As one can see, they are also a cradle of evolution, the origin of the diversity of species in the oceans. Scientists discovered that the rate of new species development on coral reefs is around 45% higher than anywhere else. Almost half of all invertebrates that occupied the seabed began life on reefs before spreading out elsewhere. What's he after now, this nosy, pouting trunkfish? He can't stop looking deep into the eyes, or rather lens, of the camera. Silver grunts. They use this hideaway as if it were a natural cave. This sunken colossus has become used to this new function during the course of time. Odd. Is this moray being hidden by a so-called rock beauty so we can't see him? Coral larvae. Wherever the current allows and there is enough light, they begin to grow. Millions of them, left behind in the currents as spawn by their parents on moonlit nights, they begin their search for places to settle. Once they have found a suitable base, they secrete lime, with which they can adhere to a chosen surface. The calcareous shell protects the polyp, and now it can continue to propagate. Before long, a bud-like appendage forms, from which a new polyp develops, and so on and so forth. In due course, a coral colony, or even a new reef, is created. It looks mysterious from a distance. By swimming closer, one can easily fall under its spell. Sea turtles can dive to depths of 1,500 meters. We often wonder just what they experience in the eternal darkness down there. We like to think that they feel much more comfortable here on the vibrant reef in the sunshine. As they are unable to regulate their body temperature themselves, one only encounters them in warm seas. They commute between their ancestral nesting sites and rich seaweed meadows, covering thousands of miles in the process. Climate change, the pollution of the seas, and fishing nets create considerable problems for sea turtles. Who knows just how long we will be able to encounter these magnificent creatures in the wild? Of course, there are endangered species agreements, but the demand for turtle meat and tortoiseshell unfortunately remains. Here on the Bahamas, there are still original nesting beaches where the animals are relatively undisturbed. Most of the many islands are uninhabited. Eventually, the sea turtle disappears again into the infinite blue ocean. And considering the dangerous journey ahead, no one knows whether the animal will return here the following year. Who is in hiding here? A Caribbean trumpetfish. He has adapted his body precisely to that of the gorgonian he has chosen as camouflage. Now that he feels discovered, he elegantly takes his leave. This reef is a huge underwater city with many inhabitants, infinitely more numerous than the few human inhabitants of the islands. Skyscrapers of coral, streets of bright white sand, both leading toward the islands, always in the direction of the waves. One of these streets now leads us from the open sea to land. The Lucayan National Park on Grand Bahama, here surrounded by pine forests and mangroves, is one of the world's largest underwater cave systems. Christina from the UNEXO Diving Center is about to show us the way to one of the hidden entrances.
So it's really funny, people like look at this and say, oh yeah, pretty obvious, but try to imagine this when first was discovered. Everything was growing in, right? So these people had to come here and cut everything out. Maybe there's an entrance over there that takes me completely to another cave, but nobody ever went there. Actually, there is one going over there. My name is Cristina Zanato, and I'm a full cave diving instructor and a cave explorer. The cave that we are today is Mermaid's Lair, and it's one of the two entrances of the old free town system in Freeport, Grand Bahama, the Bahamas. The system is connected to the open ocean, and we know that because there's some creatures in there that do travel from the open ocean to the freshwater on a seasonal time. There's a freshwater eels that come into the freshwater to reproduce, so we know they have to find their way in and they have to find their way out. What I try to do with my work is creating updated maps to give to Bahama National Trust, which is working really hard to protect the entire area above the cave, not just the entrance itself, because the entire ecosystem is very dependent on what is above the cave to maintain the integrity of the cave below. And the reason why we really want to protect the caves is because the caves are our freshwater supply.
At last, Christina has guided us to Ben's Cavern. This cave system was formed around 300,000 years ago and stretches 18 kilometers into the interior of Grand Bahama. The sea level dropped dramatically during several ice ages because the ice caps of the poles extended, taking huge amounts of water with them. As a result, the Bahama banks found itself high and dry. Rain and the acidic secretions of bacteria hollowed out the limestone base of the islands and formed these grottos, which were to remain above sea level for a very long time. The rock above the cave is extremely permeable. Rainwater permanently seeps through from above, depositing itself on the salt water that ingresses the caves from the sea. The layers do not mix, as fresh water is lighter than salt water. So-called freshwater lenses are created, and the center of this grotto is deep enough to accommodate one of the biggest freshwater lenses of the island.
What happened is the weight of the decorations, you'll see the size of the decorations during the last ice age between 11 and 13,000 years ago was so heavy. This was a dry cave at the time, that basically the weight collapsed through the ceiling of the second chamber. The second chamber used to be a little bit smaller and created this vast chamber that we're going to be swimming in. All right? It goes in way more than 70 feet, but 70 meters, but we'll stay within about 50 meters of the entrance. And it's about 30 meters wide, and it's about 12 meters from ceiling to bottom.
This entrance is furnished with a staircase and a platform, making it easier for divers and their heavy equipment. The water has a jade green hue and shimmers mysteriously in the sunlight, despite being covered by a layer of dust. Could these characters here be freshwater fish? Or have they come through the labyrinth of corridors from the sea? Our presence startles hundreds of bats hanging from the ceiling. The pleasant green-colored light of the cave entrance soon becomes gentle darkness. We dive down into a space of gigantic proportions. Even our strong lamps can only partially illuminate its magnitude. With its 10,000 meters of mapped lines, Ben's Cavern is the largest discovered cave here on Grand Bahama. Diving is only permitted with special authorization, and only as long as the diver has passed the appropriate cave diving training. Be this as it may, divers die in accidents in these caves every year. In some places, the stone is so porous that the air bubbles disappear as if by magic, the countless limestone pegs. The smoother the surface, the denser the limestone. The air bubbles, gleaming as if they were of liquid mercury, remain on the ceiling for quite some time before even they disappear. When the cave was still dry, hard water continually leaked through the permeable ceiling. It dropped to the floor and left the lime behind, drop for drop, layer for layer. During the course of millennia, stalactites grew from the ceiling and stalagmites formed on the ground. They are almost transparent. Some grew more than 200,000 years, incessantly. Their interiors stored a lot of information from this long time span. Lime and other chemicals dissolved in water were deposited, creating layers similar to the growth rings of trees. They provide information about the climate and precipitation, as well as the composition of soil and the air. The reddish color of the rings reveals that major climate changes were preceded by deposits of red dust from the Sahara. carried here over 10,000 kilometers across the sea. Even today, storms increasingly carry red Sahara sand to these islands. In the last 50 years alone, there has been a tenfold increase. Christina points to something on the cave wall. Her amusing gesture, as if she were eating something, signifies popcorn, and this heavily structured wall almost looks as if it's been coated with popcorn. The otherwise rather bright stone has been coated with a dark layer. Bacteria have formed and deposited in the salty, brackish water. Here and there, embedded fossils can be found. This fossilized snail shell, for example. The different species in the walls and the ceiling reveal the alternating freshwater and saltwater floods, or dry periods in the cave. This is where salt water meets fresh water, a bubbling, mysterious intermediate layer. In this transition, in some caves, bacteria eat away at organic material. They then excrete toxic hydrogen sulfate, which can prove dangerous to divers on a long stay. However, beneath the orange-colored swaths, the water is so low in oxygen that fossil remains are particularly well preserved. The remains of animal and human inhabitants, long since extinct on the islands, were found here. Fortunately, this type of bacteria doesn't exist in Ben's cavern. And although we'd love to, we are not going to penetrate this mysterious world any further, as we are not equipped to be able to do so. Later on, Christina tells us that our dive merely took us to the entrance of this cave system. This, as we saw it, gigantic cave cathedral, is just a tiny section of a myriad of tunnels, grottos and gorges, which traverse the island and yet are not always connected to one another. Concrete plans for the construction of hotels and holiday villages had already been made, even on the territory of this nature reserve. When it became clear just how immense these grottos are, the plans were fortunately shelved. In the distance, during our ascent, subdued yet reassuring green light shines its way through the crystal clear water until it reaches us. The red sand of the Sahara, is it another indication of an imminent climate change? Global warming is apparently leading almost everywhere to the melting of glaciers and polar ice caps. The rise of the sea level also threatens this important freshwater reservoir. And not only that, as they are located just above sea level, the Bahamas belong to the island paradises that face a fate similar to Atlantis. Many things will change, unavoidably, in the next decades and centuries, for the environment and, of course, also for us. This makes the untiring efforts of people like Ken Neddemeyer all the more important, someone who seized the initiative to come to the assistance of a habitat in desperate danger. Then there is Christina, the diving instructor, and her many years of hard work, helping to prevent the cultivation and inevitable destruction of this area and its cave systems, who also campaigns for a better understanding of sharks, and who continues to do so.